You'll own nothing and you'll be happy. This ominous and somewhat threatening phrase originated in a 2016 video by the World Economic Forum, summarizing an essay written by Danish politician Ida Auken. The phrase has been used by critics who accuse the WEF of desiring restrictions on ownership of private property.
Now, this phrase, which you may be familiar with in comment sections on YouTube or Instagram or TikTok, was also found prevalent in another comment section of some recent articles that were released announcing some new housing news. That news stated that Canada's largest landowner plans to bring over 50 buildings to market as affordable housing units. Now, on the surface, that looks and sounds pretty good. But as we do a deeper dive, which we like to do on this show, we have to ask the question, is it actually a good thing?
Deep dives. We are once again scuba diving into the new federal initiative aimed at tackling Canada's housing crisis. The government announced 56 properties for conversion into affordable housing. We are going to explore the implications and potential impacts of this plan.
What does it mean for the housing market and for affordability across Canada?
Could this be the key to solving the housing crunch? And why do people seem so upset and concerned about it?
And also, what is the government's real estate portfolio made up of, and what types of buildings are these that they're proposing?
Welcome back to the Canadian Real Estate Investor Podcast. My name is Daniel Foch.
And I'm Nick Hill. Thank you so much for joining us today. Let's start things off by setting the stage. Okay, Canada has a housing crisis. We're pretty sure everyone is aware of that at this point.
And solving a housing crisis is hard. A crisis is, by its very definition, a complicated time of intense difficulty. There's usually no quick fix for a crisis.
Exactly, Dan. You need multiple solutions, multiple fixes. And this recent one seems to be the newest possible solution put forward by the current Canadian government. Okay, so let's start off by looking at this article from CTV titled Feds Seek to Convert Dozens of Government Properties for Affordable Housing. Dan, start me off with a quick excerpt from this article.
The federal government has added 56 properties to a new public lands bank of locations that are suitable for long-term leases so developers can build housing. A move the housing minister says will help boost the supply of homes Canadians can afford. Sean Fraser made the announcement in Halifax. Making public lands available for home construction is going to reduce the cost of construction and in turn reduce the cost of living, Fraser said.
So former military bases, Canada Post sites, and federal office buildings alike are among the properties currently included in this public lands bank, many of which were previously set aside for sale and that are no longer in use. Now, the plan is to offer most of them for long-term leases rather than a one-time sale. That is in order to keep the lands in public hands and ensure that housing built on them remains affordable.
The current list includes properties in 28 municipalities in 7 provinces, what will grow over time through an ongoing review of underused or vacant federal land and buildings. And this was outlined in the housing plan. They did say they were going to do this, so nobody should really be surprised that they were going to do that, or that they did this per se. But they finally actually come out and announced it and listed the properties. And we had Sean Fraser on the show to discuss their housing plan, and we also had the Shadow Housing Minister, so his opposition, Scott Aitchison, on to kind of critique it as well. So I feel like if you ever get a chance, go back and listen to that episode. Yeah. It was a good episode on sort of the whole thing.
Both sides of that picture. Yeah, both gentlemen very well spoken, and both actually quoted in the next couple of paragraphs here. And Dan, I'd argue I think people are surprised when governments actually do keep their words. There's a lot of announcements that end up nowhere. So I think this is interesting regardless of what happens. Now, 5 of those properties that they mentioned out of the 56 that were proposed are now moving into the development phase, with governments asking developers for expressions of interest or requests for proposals, otherwise known as RFPs. 4 of them are on former military bases in Calgary, Edmonton, Toronto, and Ottawa, while the 5th is on the site of a former National Film Board building in Montreal.
Conservative housing critic Scott Aitchison dismissed the latest plan as a repeat of something the Liberals have been promising to do since 2015. The Tories pointed out both the 2015 Liberal platform and 17 platform promised an inventory of public lands to make more properties available for affordable housing. It took 9 years after he promised to build homes on federal lands for Justin Trudeau to actually identify the few parcels of land he would build on, Aitchison said. In a video statement shared to social media, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau took a shot at Pierre Poilievre over the use of federal land, saying the Conservative Party leader wants to sell it all off and make a quick buck. I would actually not mind if our government made a quick buck at this point.
What is wrong with making a quick buck?
Well, I mean, they need money, so
yeah,
that does nothing for you. I mean, in fairness, if it balanced the budget, it could help on the tax side. Maybe, I don't know.
No. The budget balances itself.
Right.
Remember?
Right.
Yeah. I mean, for those longtime listeners, Dan and I don't enjoy getting too political on the show, but I mean, honestly, it's impossible in today's day and age with
For sure.
the subject matter that we cover. So,
well, and I would also say like the biggest person who can impact the outcome of your investment right now, or the biggest group, is the government, right? Like you look at in the last episode we were talking about Calgary, they upzoned to 8 units on residential lots across the city. Like if you owned a lot a year ago, your output value just went from 1 unit or 2 units, maybe a duplex, to 8.
Yeah.
So like that's a significant impact. So the government is worth discussing in that context. And it just so happens that everything that they're battling about right now is related to what we're talking about, because it's housing, right?
Now, on that note, the Conservative housing plan involves the sale of 15% of all federal buildings to be turned into homes. Now, Minister Sean Fraser said construction of housing on the first 5 properties could begin in the first half of 2025. So I think this is where some of the maybe chirps from the opposition are coming here, Dan, right? I mean, we saw this all the way back in 2015, and we're now looking at the first 5 properties beginning construction 10 years later in 2025.
It's interesting because like even when I had the conversation with Minister Fraser on the podcast, I sort of said like, I think you guys are kind of got your backs up against the wall here. Like you have to deliver before 2025, and polls are showing that it's going to be very difficult regardless. But I think Canadians have sort of like lost faith in their ability to execute on this. So, I mean, it's you only really have to wait less than a year, because if they don't deliver in the first half of 2025, I think people are just going to be like that. That's pretty ambitious timeline to build. Look, I've built stuff before. It's like, I don't know. So anyway, just a thought there. Under the new plan, the government plans to partner with those in the housing with the housing sector and communities to build homes with a novel long-term lease, not a one-time sale, to ensure every site is affordable housing and the public land stays public. So, I mean, it makes sense because, if they're the landowner, and this isn't uncommon, by the way, like the World Trade Center, like all of those office buildings in New York are owned by the port, right? Like
so that's a land lease from the Port Authority to the developer.
Yeah. So many of the 56 properties across the country were listed as housing solutions in budget 2024, including the 5 properties for which the Canada Lands Company is seeking proposals.
Yeah. Now, back in April of this year, the Liberal government announced their larger housing plan, which aims to create 3.87 million new homes by 2031. Through the Public Lands for Homes plan, they hope to unlock 250,000 homes alone. And yes, don't worry, we are going to provide some context on what the heck those plans are.
Yeah, so let's pause here and provide that context and unpack some of this. So, does anyone believe we're building 3.87 million new homes by 2031, which is just over 6 years away now? That's number one. Number two, what does a long-term lease from the government look like? Number three, what is Public Lands for Homes plan? And number four, what are these 56 properties?
Yeah, okay. Well, why don't we start with your first question there, Dan? Does anyone think these homes are getting built? Look, I, as an entrepreneur and as an optimist, I love a grand ambition, okay? But some simple math and a hard look in the mirror and what we've been able to produce, I don't know if the math is mathing. So here's some rough stuff. And again, I'm not a math genius, but let work with me. Okay. 3.87 million homes, 6 years, or rather, if you're talking about your child, 72 months, or that's 2,190 days. Now, that means that we need to be building 1767. So 1,767 homes per day, every single day, nonstop for the next 6 years straight. Now, Dan, there's boy math, there's girl math, but the most undefeated math of all time seems to be government math.
Realtor math is up there too.
Realtor math is, yeah, it's wedged in somewhere between boy math and government math.
So, okay, before we jump in on what a land lease is, the one thing that I would also mention is like the last time that we saw an iteration of this in 2017. Do you remember? I think we talked about this on the show. You remember Sidewalk Toronto?
Of course, yeah.
So
the big Google project.
Yeah, so Google was supposed to build this like super city. They said it was going to be a new kind of mixed use complete community, and it was a great site, the Quayside site, which was federally owned. But Waterfront Toronto was tasked with the process of getting these RFPs to solicit bids for an innovation and funding partner. But then it kind of came out when they submitted the plans that it was like very much, it was kind of like this like dystopian state, right? Like it was all, I mean, that might fly today, honestly, but it was all like cameras everywhere.
Welcome today,
it was like, like I think you wouldn't have to have like a Metro pass because it would just like watch your face as you get onto stuff, and so anyway, people are like, okay, this sounds like a surveillance state experiment, and I mean, honestly, like in a post-COVID world, that might fly, but back then it did not. So anyway, that would be like one of the good examples that I would say.
Yeah, or the new one that's prevalent, and I apologize for our listeners across the country. We're really just using Toronto-centric examples right now. But what's the there's putting a new spa down by
Therme
Spa,
yeah,
on the old grounds of
Ontario Place.
Ontario Place, yeah, Ontario Place. So that again is a 99-year lease.
Yeah,
and it's
another good example.
Yeah,
a good bad example, maybe, because that one's definitely riddled in controversy as well. So
you said they tend to be these long government leases.
Yeah.
But talk to me about what a land lease is, Dan, because traditionally, we like to buy real estate. One of the main reasons I like to buy real estate is because I like the land, right? Yeah. I don't want condos because I don't want a box in the sky. I like something that I can develop and not have Big Brother say no. So,
or I'm going to watch you on your Metro Pass. Or a land lease is a homeownership model where individuals can own their homes without purchasing the land, making these homes about 30% cheaper than others in the area. Popular among first-time buyers, families, and retirees, it allows them to allocate funds to other priorities while building equity.
So let's look at maybe some key features. Now, again, the land lease that we're talking about is not in the same traditional sense that, Ontario Place would be taken over, but land leases do exist. Now, some of the key benefits of those are affordability, right? Rising construction costs, rising housing costs. Land lease properties present a cost-effective solution. So, for instance, a home on a land lease community may cost significantly less than the average freehold home across the country. We also see lower mortgages and taxes since you don't have to buy the land that your property is actually on. Mortgage payments and property taxes are lower. Also, you'll likely have less maintenance. Homeowners obviously maintain their homes, but community managers handle upkeep of common and public areas. So land lease properties provide a bit more of a feasible option for owning a home in desirable locations without having to incur that high typical cost associated with some of those areas.
One of the things that I thought would be worth mentioning, I'm actually on a committee for a project like this in the city of Toronto with Brad Bradford. It's like their Missing Middle pilot project, and Create.to is trying to do something similar, but in the city of Toronto. So it's lands owned by the city of Toronto, and they want to support local developers and kind of do this similar type of model. So I think the governments have finally realized, like all these real estate folks have been making all this money over the last couple of years with real estate, so maybe we should get into that business, which is usually
great.
A bad
now
sign,
the government's in real estate too.
If anyone's going to mess up a market, but anyway, no. But Create.to is doing some great work around this, and if you're if you're a developer in Toronto looking to do some missing middle stuff and you're looking for land leases of this nature, reach out and I'd love to connect you with CreateTO because they're looking to get some feedback from developers on this project right now.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. Great. Great to hear that, Dan. Now, a couple of minutes ago, you had asked me a series of questions, and one of them was about that public land bank. So let's take a look at this so-called public land bank. Now, if you find yourself on the Government of Canada's website, which I know most people just peruse there for fun, then I want you to head over to the Public Services and Procurement tab. Then from there, the Real Property Services and Parliamentary Infrastructure tab. Then you're finally going to end up on the Public Lands for Homes landing page. Now, Dan, what does this page read like?
The Public Lands for Homes Canada Public Land Bank page says there are currently 56 listed properties representing the potential construction of thousands of housing units on a total of 305 hectares of land across Canada.
Now, as a Canadian, you're probably thinking, what the heck does 305 hectares of land look like? Well, the Government of Canada did us a favor here and said, hey,
is this actually on the Government
this,
of Canada
I swear
website?
You can pull this
So
up. It is right there. They said, hey, don't worry. We know that Canadians have no idea, no spatial awareness. 305 hectares is the land equivalent to 2,000 hockey rinks.
There you go.
Or 400 Canadian football fields, because I guess
the
CFL is bigger or smaller
a bit wider,
than
and I think they're
NFL?
110 yards.
So,
something weird. I don't know. And the posts are at the front rather than the back. People always collide with them.
So there you go. Imagine 2,000 hockey rinks worth of land. Now, Dan, while we're on the topic of land.
Yeah. The majority of all lands in Canada are held by governments as public land and are known as Crown lands. About 89% of Canada's land area is Crown land, which may either be federal, 41%, or provincial, 48%. The remaining 11% is privately owned. The largest landowners are the provincial governments, who hold all unclaimed land in their jurisdiction. How do I get? Can we just offer on that? I think you can. I think you can just submit an offer.
Just 99-year lease it.
Yeah. Over 90% of the sprawling boreal forest of Canada is provincial Crown land. Provincial lands account for 60% of the area of the province of Alberta, 94% of the land in British Columbia. Well, that's because the rest is just the lower mainland, basically. And there's some cities kind of just scattered out there. There's so many mountains.
It's wild to think about that, though. 94%.
Yeah, 95% of Newfoundland and Labrador, which is more populous with moose than humans, actually. I think that's true. I think this is a real stat. Pretty sure there's more moose than humans on Newfoundland. And 48% of New Brunswick. So the largest single landowner in Canada by far, and by extension one of the world's largest, is the Government of Canada.
Wow. So look at that. No wonder we love real estate. Canada's got one of the biggest portfolios in the world. On that note, this is kind of crazy. It occupies more than 6% of the Earth's surface. So let's circle back, Dan. You asked me earlier again about these 56 properties that the government wants to turn into affordable housing. So I got kind of fascinated with what the government portfolio in total, what that looks like.
It's funny. Because I was getting really curious. Who owns the most land in the world, and it ends up being King Charles, but it's because it's Crown land.
Yeah,
that's 90% of the land. Anyway, sorry, I interrupted your great flow there. I bet you're going to tell me about what this government's portfolio looks like in total.
I sure am. So again, I know you all spend a lot of time perusing the Canada government website. So if you head over to that website, go to the Directory of Federal Real Property. This is the core realty property system of the federal government. It contains common real property data for 73 custodian organizations, including, now these are the real numbers of the portfolio here, okay? 19,920 owned and leased properties. I wonder how many doors they count that as. 41, does the Canada government now just put in their bio, 50,000 doors, 100,000 doors? They've also got 41,190,275 hectares of land area, 38,541 buildings, and 296,269,174 square feet of floor space.
There you go. That's a pretty hefty portfolio. You think it cash flows?
By the sounds of it, I doubt it, but I did go down a deeper rabbit hole here and just had some fun. And I found myself on another page in the directory of federal real property.
And what was that one?
Well, it seems to be the centralized federal database for every single property and piece of land owned by the government. And they are ranked, interestingly, by organizations with the most number of buildings or the most number of properties or the most land area.
Anything interesting on there?
Yeah, kind of. So I don't really know what the significance of this is, but it's interesting to me regardless. So organizations with the most building, some of these may not come as a surprise. You got number one, National Defense, almost 15,000 buildings. Okay. Parks Canada Agency, got a lot of parks here in Canada. So that would make sense. Drastic drop off from the almost 15,000. At about a third, we have just over 5,000 Parks Agency buildings. Royal Canadian Mounted Police, so the RCMP, just under 3,000 buildings. Canada Post, that one makes sense as well, just under 3,000. And Global Affairs Canada at 2,392 buildings. Now,
That's the one that includes that New York penthouse that everybody's talking about?
Yeah, that'll be 2,091 very quickly. Now, Dan, if you could read me the organization that apparently has the least amount of buildings, this is where things seem to get interesting.
Yeah, number 66 on the list says Infrastructure Canada with a total of 0 buildings. So last on the list is a government organization that you would think, or at least hope, would have one building, not just
It just gives
several,
some
but
more
one.
people to work.
So according to the website, they have no buildings or land or anything.
Okay, so interesting random takeaway. Do with that what you will. But let's climb back out of the rabbit hole together and get back on track here. So, as Canada's largest landowner, the government promised in its 2024 budget to reduce its office portfolio by 50%. The document said that the Public Services and Procurement Canada had over 6 million square meters of office space, with around half either being underused or just completely vacant.
Now, earlier in the show, Nick, you mentioned that the Liberal government had a larger housing plan, which aims to create 3.87 million new homes by 2031.
Yeah, exactly, Dan. And we did a full episode on that housing plan as well as one of our webinars. So go check out that episode, episode 193, 5 of the most important changes in Canadian real estate. And that's where Dan and I pulled, I think it was 5 with a few bonus, 5 of the things that we thought were the most important out of that housing plan. But overall, here's a very quick highlight refresher. Now, again, this is a very robust document, so this is really high level stuff. But the plan outlines several initiatives to address housing challenges and boost the construction of affordable homes across Canada. The first one being Public Lands for Homes plan. So something we just discussed, which is utilizing federal, provincial, and territorial and municipal lands for affordable housing developments in partnership. So we have that public-private partnership with builders to maintain that long-term affordability.
The next one is the Apartment Construction Loan Program, which is $15 billion in loans to construct a minimum of 30,000 new rental units, with a goal to create over 131,000 new apartments by that deadline.
The next on the list is Canada Builds Initiative, which aims to build affordable middle-class homes on underutilized lands using a mix of both federal loans and provincial investments.
The next is Indigenous Housing Support, providing targeted investments to improve housing conditions for Indigenous peoples in various areas.
Home ownership and rental assistance make the list as well, where launching tenant protection funds and leveraging rental payment history to enhance credit scores for tenants, as well as to increase the home buyers plan withdrawal limit by 25,000 and to extend mortgage amortizations for first-time buyers.
It's interesting, the credit score piece, like that, because I feel like that infrastructure already exists. Like we did some videos on social media for Chexy, which is like a good.
Great
and I know
program.
they I know they advertised on the Canadian Investor podcast as well. But basically, you can pay rent with your credit card, and they have a program to like, so if you're a points collector or whatever. I mean, I obviously understand the risk that potentially if you don't pay your credit card off, like it could be a debt trap. But I think the idea is that if you're a points collector or whatever, you can build credit, get some points, get some bonus back. So check them out as well. Chexy, I can't remember the website, but they're doing great work, and kind of, I feel like any of those companies like them, there's a couple of other ones that are all really well poised to take advantage of this program that the government's mentioning.
For sure, and about time that something
Yeah,
like that
worth
comes
like
into
for
play.
those of you who are listening who own stuff as well, like it's worth mentioning this to your tenants.
I've got landlords that landlord friends that have almost forced their tenants to being like, look, this is part of the
Yeah.
rental application, right? You need to be on this program kind of
Yeah.
thing. So
Well, I think like especially with the credit building piece, because like it would increase somebody's likeliness to pay rent. Like I think we talked about this in the episode that we did, but if your rent's on your credit, you're going to be more likely to pay it. So they kind of they're smart, like politically they made that sound like it was for
yeah,
tenants, but it definitely was for the whole system,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
The next one is affordable housing and homelessness elimination. $1 billion for the affordable housing fund and a $1.5 billion Canada rental protection fund. I don't really know any details on that one, but it just sounds like throwing big $1 billion numbers at stuff.
Yeah, billion here, billion there. What's it for? Who knows? But it starts with a B. The kind of final one that we're going to touch on here, something kind of near and dear to Dan and I's heart, is the skilled trades workforce development. So that aims to provide $90 million for apprenticeships, $10 million for trade awareness, and $50 million for credential recognition, focusing on residential construction. Now, I don't see a billion there. 10 million, 90 million compared to $1 billion is absolutely nothing. And I think there should be way more attention put on skilled trades workforce development. Like literally, how are we going to get out of this mess that we're in without skilled trades, right? So
We were talking
I'd
about
like to see more allocation of funds and attention here.
they just need to make hard hats that can fit the broccoli hair. We were talking about Gen Z earlier. Like,
Yeah, how do we get guys
that's
with
why
the
they've all
perfect
been.
perms to mess them up and put a hard hat on?
That's
They
the
don't want to
problem
do it.
right there.
How
Now
about
it all
this?
makes sense
Eliminate
now.
safety on a
There you
construction
go.
site,
And tube socks.
you can
instead
wear
of
tube
wear
socks,
broccoli.
short shorts, and broccoli hair on site.
Done. Okay.
So those 7 things that we just outlined from, again, a very robust plan put forward by the current government aim to increase housing supply, improve affordability, protect tenants, and expand skilled trades that are necessary for their construction projects that are going to get out of the mess that we've found ourselves in here.
Yeah. Now let's get to a quick summary of the public lands plan, I guess.
Yeah, so Canada is addressing its housing crisis by leveraging underused public lands to build affordable homes. The government's housing plan, which was outlined in Budget 2024, which we also covered, aims to again create that, what I consider at this point to be probably an impossible number of 3.87 million new homes by 2031. Included in that 3.87 million is that 250,000 homes that we've mentioned, Dan, and that'll be via the Public Lands for Homes plan. Now, this plan involves utilizing surplus federal lands and acquiring more of that land for housing, leasing lands to keep homes affordable for the long term. So again, really banking on that public-private partnership, and then facilitating faster development with legislative support and mapping tools. So, legislative support would be ideally cutting back some of that, red tape that we're so wrapped up in here in Canada.
Yeah, the plan includes building on lands owned by Canada Post and National Defence and converting vacant federal offices into housing. So a little bit of the office to residential conversion. A $500 million fund will help acquire additional public lands for development. I thought they already own them, but I guess they got to buy them also.
Sounds like a bit of a Ponzi to me, but
yeah, I remember that when I worked in the public sector, sometimes I would be seeing invoices and I'm like, I guess like it does make sense. Like these guys all have to pay each other still, like it must just be an accounting nightmare. But yeah, I mean, like, so if it is owned by one side of the government, they got to make the other side own it. I don't know. Anyway,
glad I'm not part of that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This comprehensive approach. Yeah. Don't we have an AI for that yet? The comprehensive approach relies on collaboration across various government levels to ensure affordable housing for future generations, like the broccoli-haired, non-hard hat wearing folks that we mentioned. So here's what you need to know. Canada is huge. The government has a big portfolio that isn't in great shape because really, like, what are you going to do with this stuff? And we mentioned in the last episode, government employees aren't going back to office as much as other sectors. I think they have the lowest return to office. Mm-hmm. And so they have these loose plans to utilize existing infrastructure. So the question remains, is this a good thing? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, before we jump into that, I do have a quick example of a little piece of government affordability, which again was just rife with the WEF comments. But Dan, talking about the government buildings that are either vacant or underused, you know, we just did the Collier's cap rate report as one of our most recent episodes, and within that we talk about the different asset classes, right? We've got class A office, but then we've got class B office, which
Yeah.
is traditionally obviously not as attractive as the class A. But class B, I feel like, is where government lives, right? Government's not out there like, the pension funds and the tech companies getting the sexiest offices. They can't
Small
really get
windows
away
and
with it.
stuff.
Yeah, small windows, kind of brutalist architecture, lots of concrete, maybe really outdated systems. So, I think, I don't know. I just,
Let's just give give those small windows to some condo dwellers, apartment dwellers, then
yeah,
and just convert them.
I guess so. So before we get to, because I do want to kind of close out this
Yeah.
with a bit of a conversation. We got some questions that I want to ask you, and you can ask me, and then get our audience thinking here. But before we do that, there is one example we can look at of recent government affordability, which I actually made some content on my Instagram, which was met with the same reaction. I can't count the amount of times I've had the "you'll owe nothing and be happy" in my Instagram comments. Now, I'm probably less than you, I'd assume, but I'm sure we both get that a lot. Now, this can be found from
Yeah,
a
my response whenever people post that comment on my TikTok or whatever, it's always on TikTok for me. But I just say, when do I get to the be happy part?
yeah.
I already own nothing. When do I do the be happy part?
Very good point. Yeah, they don't talk about that. They just talk about owning nothing. I guess the be happy, that is that carrot that you're forever seeking. So this is from a National Post article called Freeland, as in Chrystia Freeland, the finance minister. Freeland touts affordable development, renting 330 square foot units for $1,600. Dan, I took this article, I put it into Chat GPT. I got it to summarize it for us. Can you read this quick summary?
I will, but it's funny. Actually, I'll read it and then I'm going to give you my comments. I have
All
a
right,
good
all
comment
right.
on this. So, a new rental high rise in Victoria, BC highlighted it as a part of the government's effort to provide affordable low and middle class or middle income Canadians with up through the apartment construction loan program. Hudson House, 227 units. The rents are considered high even by coastal BC standards. 2 bedrooms at $3,300 and the smallest studio rents for $1,680. Despite steep rents, it meets federal affordability criteria by having 20% of the units aligned with local income standards. So this isn't uncommon, right? Like you often see this with people using the CMHC program to get to use really small suites. Like there's no, it just has to be 30% of median household income. So you're basically just saying, oh, like that sucks for you if you're the affordable or the person who needs affordable housing. You're just reserved to a really small unit. Because much like the way I play golf, like
This is
this
going
is
to be good. Here we go.
well, if you ever want to have a lower golf score, this is a really really good secret for
Take
golf.
less shots.
No. Play fewer holes.
Okay.
So I just play 9, right? And they're doing the same thing with these units. It's like, oh well, why build a 600 square foot unit and rent it out for $3,300 a month when we could just build half of that and then we just reduce the rent.
Oh,
So
my
it's,
goodness.
you were talking about government math, realtor math. That's Dan's golf math for you.
You know what?
They use the exact same principle, which I don't know what it's called, but it's this magic thing that happens when I only play half the course. My score improves significantly.
I should take that tactic because
Yeah.
my golf score is not good. But you know what? It is not as bad as a 330 square foot apartment for $1,600 that is being sold to Canadians as affordable developments. Because I don't care what political rhetoric you shape around something like this, you're not really fooling anybody these days, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Canadians are too smart for this kind of stuff. This is all in the public
Yeah.
eye. You've got people such as ourselves and much smarter people providing commentary on this stuff, and Canadians overall aren't happy. So I got a couple of rapid fire questions. I'll spit them out so everyone can kind of get thinking about them, and then let's spend the next couple of minutes chatting about these. So first things first, will this even do anything? Second thing, will this ever happen, or is this just kind of kicking the can one more year down the 10-year road that can has been kicked since the first time all this stuff was announced back in 2015? Third thing is, and we've got an episode coming out about this. So we won't go too into detail because it is a detailed process, but how hard are some of these buildings going to be to convert? An old national post office, some old military
Well, they
sites?
just demo them, right?
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we're demoing, but I guess are we turning
Yeah.
some of the stuff in Ottawa maybe into for like the office to res stuff?
Well, they have buildings all over the country. So
And then final question,
yeah,
how do we think developers in the private sector are going to respond to the government kind of reaching out saying, "Hey, get into business with me for the next
I
99
mean, look,
years."
man, like I've said this a number of times on the show. Um, like I publicly basically called for a bailout of developers recently, much to my dismay.
You will owe
But
nothing
it
to
was
be
not a
happy.
good idea. Don't ever do that. But um, this is not a bad idea. Like whether the execution remains to be proven, and I understand why Canadians don't have faith in the existing government to in their ability to execute this, especially on the timeline that they've mentioned, like starting in early 2025. Because many of these are brownfield sites. Like it sounds to me like policymakers who just don't understand how complex it is to get real estate developed to be like, oh yeah, like let's just like when
Here's the land, just
like
do it.
when somebody's like, oh hey, can you do this project for me, but I need it done like tomorrow, and you're like, oh well no, but
Like that's a 30 hours worth of
am
work.
I the only guy who's going to
Yeah.
do it for you? So you pretty much put me in that position anyway, and then you're gonna get mad when I don't do it. So um, there there's a lot to unpack here. The first question was, will this do anything? If they deliver, it should, right? Like they can technically control the rents. If they're going to ask developers or builders to do that piece, they're taking one of the big risks out of it from my perspective, which is as soon as the government does anything, really, they overpay. No offense if you're in the government, but you tend to do that. Like, I mean, contractors just know, like, even if you go to the Altus cost construction cost report, there's literally different prices for public sector and private sector.
Yeah,
They can
for
build the
sure.
exact same thing.
Yeah.
You charge the public sector twice as much.
And
like,
for some reason,
honestly,
public takes always way longer. There's always
yeah,
mess
exactly.
ups in the
Delays
budget,
and
delays.
yeah, and it's just because you don't really have experts in the space. So assuming they outsource it properly, that could do something.
Okay,
right?
so first question: will this do anything in a ideal world? Yes,
Yeah,
it should.
if they do it the way that they say they're going to. Yeah.
Okay. Second question: if this ideally this does something, but will this even happen? Right, going back 10 years, we started to hear about this stuff. Imagine if even these first 5 projects had been started 10 years ago or 8 years ago or 5 years ago.
Yeah, I think that this was borrowed from Pierre's platform, actually, like a lot of the things seem to be. And again, like no offense intended. It's just like it seems like they tend to agree on more things when it comes to housing than they let on. I would say that it could happen. It will happen, maybe not at the scale that they're saying, but like this is necessary. Like when I said like builders were going to need to be bailed out, like that's what's happening right now. They're just doing it by giving them land rather than by buying the units that I'm saying, right? Like,
so it's a little bit of a red herring. It's like, hey, we're not going to give them money because that would piss everybody off, but how about 99-year lease and we'll give you great terms?
No, that doesn't solve a ton of the problem, right? So, if you're a developer and let's say your sites are $100 a buildable foot, you bought all of your sites in Toronto for $100 a buildable foot, and you get this now at $0, but you have to pay it over time, or you're paying a lease or whatever, assuming you're building a rental, it still doesn't solve for the $800 remaining total creation costs for high rise, right? Yeah. So something else needs to be done for that. And maybe that's where the apartment loan construction program comes in or something like that. But I think it will happen. I think that this will probably be a program that will continue to happen throughout. Like I'm expecting a political change. I think polls just are indicating that. So that's like, I honestly don't really love to get into this stuff. I like talking policy and it fascinates me, but like, who's good, who's bad, whatever. I just kind of try and model my investment decisions based on what I think is the most likely outcome, right? Like when people are like, "Oh, Dan, like you think like you're a WEF like shill, like because you think like honestly, people say that because you think that like we should multiplex everyone's houses and like force boomers to sell their homes and convert them to multiplexes or whatever, like just dumb stuff like that, right? But it's like no, I just can see what's happening, and that's the most likely outcome of what, like, you can't just keep growing the population at this rate without needing to take existing supply and cut it up, unless we're building a ton of new supply, which we weren't.
Well, unless we didn't have all the other problems that we're facing on the labor, construction materials, that side of things.
Right. And so when I was talking about the builder bailout, originally, I wasn't saying that I feel that this is maybe something that has to happen. I was just saying that this is something that is going to, that I think that should happen, because I think that economic Darwinism should be allowed to exist, right? Survival of the fittest, evolution by economic selection, you might call it, right? I think that should be allowed to exist, but it will be something that is necessary to save the Canadian economy. And this is the shape that it's taking, because now all these builders who, like, if they're saying, what is it, tens of thousands of units, all these builders who will have nothing to build in 26 and 27, right? Because nothing's selling today. And last year, 23, 24, there's no sales in the 75% reduction in pre-construction sales, which you would assume is a 75% reduction in pre-construction activity or construction activity for residential in 27, 26, 27, 28, maybe. I don't know, whenever those projects should have started. That's what they're trying to create a solution for, from my perspective. At the same time, you get to create the solution of, you get some houses out of it. So I think, honestly,
you're expecting a good response from developers.
I think look at the Greenbelt. Like, I mean, if you give people a good incentive to do something, like you dangle the right carrot for them to develop housing, as an example, because the Greenbelt was that, they're going to go after it, right? Like, especially in a market where they can't economically build anything else. Like, without this program, you're going to see, like, this will save quite a few builders from bankruptcy, to be honest with you. I really feel that. And I think that's honestly probably an underlying piece of this policy. Like, it's going to get a bunch of houses built, but the byproduct is that it also keeps all of those trades employed, right? Like, imagine you're building a high rise right now. Like, there's no new holes being dug, right? So if you're building a high rise right now, you're probably not in a hurry to finish it, because as soon as you're done that project, then you got no more work, right? Like, we talked about this on the show. You're hearing about union trades moving out of province, out of country. There's unions, like, I've heard of unions moving to, like, Seattle, Vancouver, right? Like, on some of these projects for electrical and plumbing.
I mean, it's funny, because we look at, the big developers also, speaking of land banking, the big developers a lot of the time have that, pipeline of land that they're planning on building. But I completely agree. I think a lot of the, smaller to mid cap developers that, either grew substantially or maybe grew too fast over the last couple of years, that are going to play a critical role in working and building our way out of this problem. I think this will be a great public-private partnership. And I guess my only last thought is, what does it look like to get in bed with the government and on a lease for 99 years? What kind of stipulations, what kind of fine print? And that would be the only thing that I would want to see. So as this whole policy and plans start to come more into effect, and maybe we see some of those first 5 buildings actually get work done, I'm really going to be interested to see who teams up with the government, what that looks like. Is it affordable? So with all that being said, this probably won't be the last time we talk about this. Hope everyone got a ton of value out of today. Dan, any closing remarks on this subject matter?
No, not really. I think it's interesting. I'm going to be watching it very closely. I'm certainly going to be talking about it on social media, I'm sure. So
there you go. Stay tuned. Thanks so much for listening. We'll talk to you soon.